Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying for this talk. We'll let's say that the talk will take like half an hour. So if you people after 2 hours straight movie need some break, you can go like quickly and then come back. I won't be offended at all. So. We just saw that movie Manu from Philippines. Unfortunately, I won't be able to comment the movie in the context of the movie because it's, I think a lot of that movie is about the culture, and we can't have a guest from there to talk with us about this, but we will try with Ugla to take some thematics that are in the movie and try to see how it can be at some point similar to some experience that we can live here as trans women. So. I'm Lea Aymard. I'm a trans woman from France, but I'm living here in Slovenia for 15 years. And my guest is Ugla. They are from Finland. Iceland, I'm sorry. Wow, that starts good. The people that are having a break are missing a lot. And you are
almost the same, almost.
Yeah, almost the same. I mean, it's there. I mean, somewhere. And your main occupation is like now filmmaker.
Yeah, I create films for a film project called My Generation, which is just trans people creating trans films, basically. Yeah.
So great project. So first of all, I will directly go into the topic and ask you, what did you think about that movie?
Well, that film is a lot, that's all I can say. And it's obviously difficult to reflect on a film that happens in a completely different cultural context to mine. But there's one thing that I did notice in the film, which I thought was quite funny, that it took her like 3 years to change a light bulb in one of the rooms. Because at the beginning there's no light bulb in the room of the person who's saying. And then at the end she changes the light bulb, which I thought was quite funny. All that went on, and she couldn't change the light bulb at the meantime. But I thought, I kind of loved the film, but I kind of also hated it at the same time. There was a lot of things happening, a lot of different themes, and a lot of different things to think about. I don't think I've processed it quite enough. I think I would have to watch it a few times to be able to truly process what was in it. But there was an interesting point in there where the main trans woman Manu is going to a funeral and a memorial of a Filipino trans woman that was killed by an American soldier. And I think that's a reference to another film, a documentary that was made about a trans woman in the Philippines who was killed by an American soldier. So it was interesting to see that connected into this fictional film.
The reference, yeah.
Yeah, it was a good reference, and people wouldn't know it unless they've seen the other film. And I thought it was good that at least I know the reference to that. At least I'm not completely out of my element when it comes down to this cultural context. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to say about it. There were so many different things.
Put some questions, because the way how I see the movie is like what we can see from our perspective is that kind of intersectionality. Like the trans woman is actually showing like essential to some community, and there's the thematic of motherhood, of family, like biological family / adopted family, chosen family, and it's a lot of this kind of intersectional thematics are also present in some pose or something like that.
Yeah.
But here we see we have some insight how they are organized, I see, and how they deal with this. So what's the thing? What is the thing that is that you feel is the closest from us or the farthest in this character?
I mean, I think the closest thing is that sense of chosen family, and that family that they have their own sort of community that they can go to, and that it's not related to their blood family or anything else, and they sort of have a really specific culture, and you can see it in the way they speak to each other and the way they're quite brash and all these things. And I think in all cultures there is an element of that where people react and respond to each other in very different ways, in which they wouldn't do in the outer world, which you can see they act very differently when with other people. And I think anyone who's queer or LGBT or whatever can relate to this experience of feeling there's a chosen family who you can act in a certain way, and there's a culture that people wouldn't understand coming from the outside. I think maybe the farthest thing away kind of depends, I guess, on people's privilege and people's experience, because I'm coming from Iceland, which is one of the most wealthiest countries in the world, and we have a really strong welfare system. So the idea of having to work, do sex work and all these things is very far removed from the experiences of Icelandic trans women and Icelandic trans people in general, I think. So, you know, even though I know, I know a lot of people who have been engaged in sex work and are engaged in sex work, it isn't something that I've personally done. So it's quite far removed from my personal experience, but I know that for many trans people this is an experience. So I think just coming from my sort of background where I was just able to access everything I needed and access education, and I always never lacked money and was never homeless and all these things. It's just, yeah, it's a completely different to my experience, and I realized my privilege in that position.
I wanted to ask you also, what do you think about the way how the Bona, the character, is actually her path? It's quite. It would not be possible, I think, in a Western movie, because just of these cultural differences, and it looks like the identity is not something that is problematic by itself. Like, it looks like, of course, it drives you in some level of the society. It's possible to see, but it looks like it's not completely. Can you say something about what's the difference with our perception? Because if I would make a film here with a child, that is talking about their gender identity, is like, wow.
Yeah, I think whenever you see like films made in like Europe or Western Europe about a trans kid, it's always like a completely different focus, and it's always very much about the identity, how they're going to do this, how they're going to do that, whereas in that film that wasn't really a conversation at any point. And even for people, when you start to watch the film, you're a bit unsure about how this person might identify, and then it's sort of, they don't really get into that conversation, whereas this was made in Europe, it would be very clear from the beginning, and this was the kid, and they were transitioning, and they would talk about like healthcare and social things and pronouns and all these things, whereas in this film, that's not their main priority, and that's not the main conversation. And there was like, they used different pronouns at different times, and they used different words, whereas in, it's just a completely different way of seeing identity and speaking about identity, because they never said the word gender identity, and they never said the word sexuality, and they don't have the same sort of academic take on everything as we might do, and they don't speak about identity in the same way. And it reminded me of a friend of mine who works with trans women in Greece, and it's a really, really specific community there, where they, a lot like this community in the way that it's been described to me, that even in their own language, they have their own language which they communicate, and then they also speak Greek. And it's a really, really specific community, and a lot of them do sex work and are homeless as well. So it kind of reminded me of when my friend said that he went to them and he started talking about them to their gender and gender identity, and they just said, what the hell is gender identity? Like, they don't see it that way, and that isn't how they see themselves either. So I think it's interesting how we like to theorize and academicize everything that we have, whereas these people just live their lives and it doesn't really matter as much in a way.
Yeah, it's exactly like it looks like in the movie. It looks like there's no problem at all. It's very an insight on the society that is not making binary system a law by nature.
Yeah, and then like the only sort of negative thing you really see about their identity is with the American soldier who came in and then murdered this Filipino woman. So I think that was also a message that they were sending, like, in this world, that it's not really the same in a way. But I mean, of course, they experience all sorts of things, obviously. But, yeah.
Okay, at this point, I would like to open a little the debate. If any of you have some question, wants to push some, tell us if you have something in mind, if you have some reflections.
If you have a great hot take on the film, please do share.
Yeah.
Not all at the same time.
Okay, I will I'm interested, does any one of you already know before to go to watch the movie what to expect? Not really?
I mean, I hadn't really looked into specifics of the film. I knew like 2 lines. Oh, it's going to be about someone, you know, in the Philippines, about a trans woman who's an older trans woman, and that's all I knew. And then I sort of walked in and watched the film. I was like, wow, this is not what I was expecting, which was good as well, because I didn't have any expectations. But yeah.
So, as there's no question, I will ask you, like, on a purely cinematographic level. Like, this is obviously a movie that is from industrial point of view viable. So it looks like there's some public and it's possible to make movies that are quite professional. I would like to ask you, what are your reflections about the way how they do films and how the community in Europe is making films?
I mean, I thought the film, just purely from a cinematic point of view, was really, really well made. I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how well it was made, because sometimes when you see trans films, it's always, yeah, it's interesting because trans people often work with such a low budget, and they don't have the money or the resources that you have. But it seems like this film really had the backing of a lot, and they had the resources and the budget, and they made a beautiful film out of it. And I think I was also really, really happy to see that they involved actual trans people in the creation of the film, because whenever you make films in Europe or in Hollywood especially, they always cast like a man as a trans woman, which is honestly the most boring thing you could ever do when making a film about trans people. And it just reminds me of, there's a film someone's making in Iceland, and they want to make a film about a trans woman who comes out, and she works in this like really manly work, and they were like, well, we kind of want her to be like a really manly burly guy, and then comes out and it's really awkward for his mate. And I was just like, it's such a boring way to tell a story about a trans person. So he basically wanted to cast a guy to play the trans woman to show how manly she looked or something. And I was just like, it doesn't make any sense to me that people would tell these stories, because it doesn't reflect the authentic experience of any trans person. And I was just really happy to see that, yeah, the main cast was all trans feminine people, and they all sort of led the movie. And it reflected the experiences of actual trans people, as gruesome and as, you know, yeah, as really raw as a lot of these scenes were. They do reflect the reality, and I guess for us fancy posh Europeans, it seems a bit too much and a bit too gruesome at points. But people in Europe are experiencing similar things as well, so I think a lot of people can connect to it. But yeah, just purely from this sort of cinematic point of view, I thought it was really, really well done. And yeah, I was interested in who actually made it and all that stuff, so I was actually looking at the credits, because I was pleasantly surprised by it as well.
Yeah, here, I mean, that battle of trans people acting in trans movies, it's, I think it goes with the way how the movies are made and who is making the movies, and then you have this need to tell trans stories from the cis point of view and how cis people understand. And it's funny how the ideological war is happening on this, because it's a lot of scandal about who is acting in this area.
Yeah, I just thought it was like at the start when they became quite like there was a lot of like really like they were quite like dramatic and there was a lot of foul language and there was a lot of like really they just got into it and there was like they were just completely unapologetically saying whatever they wanted to say and they weren't trying to make anyone comfortable. And for a moment I almost felt uncomfortable and I was like, this is exactly what they want people to get. Like this isn't about making anyone comfortable, this is about showing a certain reality. And that's what I really liked about it, that it was just showing a raw reality and it wasn't trying to appease anyone.
Okay, still no question from the public? Does anyone have some question for Ugla apart from the movie, on their work, on filmmaking, or?
There are no stupid questions.
Okay. How many time do we have still?
It's 9:05.
9:05. Okay. How many time we have? 15. Okay. So I think one of the things that we can try to open is the way how the surviving of these characters. Like it looks like this community is like the struggle with healthcare, the struggle with education, and all that of kind of element of rejection more or less from some part of the society leads these people to live practically on the earnings of trans women, and then the movie is showing how the trans woman is trying to look for some opportunities, I think, in some not local way, but like.
Yeah.
So it looks like at each part of their life, it looks like there's some obstacle, or there's some they are somehow very blocked in their situation. At least I saw the movie like that. And I want to know, like, if you think that the ending is something that should open to something positive, or to something like it's the generation will just repeat with from Mamu.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, yeah, it's right that there are these obstacles placed in, like, yeah, with the healthcare and education, and I think this is generic for a lot of trans people all over the world as well. So I think this is also where it connects people, like access to healthcare and sort of access to education, and the idea that you have to hide who you are when you go through school is something I think every trans person can connect to on a certain level. And I think it was interesting to see that, you know, Mamu didn't want Bona to have the same sort of, she kind of wanted her to have more opportunities, which is why she was really pushing her to go to education. And it was kind of interesting that, you know, she just knew there was no reason for her to fight for her to be who she wanted to be. She was like, you're just going to have to cut your hair, you're just going to have to suck it up, and you're going to have to do it, which is also quite sad at the same time. But it almost didn't seem like it mattered because she had those friends, and she had Kiko, the boyfriend, at the end, and all these things. So it was interesting to see these different elements of the film, and I think it ended on a slightly more positive note, even though, you know, she taught her a lot, and she's gonna probably live in a similar community. It almost seems like the younger generation were gonna have a slightly better life, and they were gonna have slightly more opportunities by by going, you know, often to education and going to school. And that's kind of what you see at the beginning as well, that Mamu is almost a bit envious of what Bona could possibly have because she comes out of probably younger than her. So it was interesting to see, and I think this is the same for a lot of trans people that I know. Like a lot of this sort of older generation feels really happy for the younger generation, but they also feel envious of what they are gonna be able to have. So I think it was a positive note, and it was interesting to see the boyfriend come. What was his name? I can't remember. Of Mamu come at the end, which was an interesting twist. But yeah, I think it was kind of like supposed to make you feel hopeful for all the characters at the end, which was nice because they went through a lot in that film.
And I was thinking about the plot, you know, because when I was reading first, like 1 year ago, before to see the first time the movie, like the plot was just like some trans girl looking for breast augmentation, and it looked like, I mean, when I was watching the movie once again this evening, I remember this Italian movie where all the movie is just about, I forgot the title, but all the movie is just about one guy who got stolen his bicycle and can't work. And so the whole movie is just like looking for this bicycle. And when I was watching that movie, I had the same feeling. It's like this character has some very, it looks like maybe from some distance superficial, completely neat.
Yeah.
But then, when you can see how this actually is, it's an element that is important for her to make more money, to be perceived on a certain way, and so it's actually well, that's the whole point of the movie, and then she doesn't got it, so...
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting how it seems at the beginning like really superficial, and she's like, I just want boobs, I'm just gonna get boobs. They say boobs like 57 times or something at the beginning, but then, you know, it becomes quite obvious that that's not what's really important. And I guess you see that especially when she raises the money for Bona and when she's in the hospital, that it's not actually about all those things, it's about community and it's about family and it's about looking out for each other.
Yeah, because it looks like she really needs this operation, but she's just giving the money for everybody else on the first place, which is also something it reminds me on Pose, also the way how the community is just like...
Yeah, and she has her like tagline that she can always earn it back later. So it's quite interesting how that doesn't, even though that's what they, you know, what they need to survive, it seems like they're always very generous with each other and they know. And you can see it when she's sitting outside that restaurant and like all of the other girls come and they give her money, and you know, there's always a sense of community and helping each other out.
Do you have this feeling also in Iceland? Not in Finland?
Yeah, I mean in Iceland it is the same to a certain extent. Like when people come to community events and stuff, people will help each other out, whether it's, you know, about some sort of, you know, information they need about healthcare or social things and social support, and there is a sense of community in the same way, but they don't have there isn't the same, you know, dire need, I suppose, is there, but there is the same sense of community and people helping each other out, and you know, it kind of reminded me when because in Iceland we have a lot of these sort of clothing markets every year where a lot of trans people come together and they bring old clothes that they don't use anymore, and you know, they give it to each other, and that's a sense of community. And many people say, you know, I'm not going to be using these clothes anymore, but I'm glad that they fit someone else now. And I think that's a sense of community where it's kind of funny where like trans women will bring their old man clothes and then they will give it to the trans men, and you know, it's quite interesting to share these type of clothes, and it's just people generally having that sense of family together.
Okay, just the last question to open a little the debate on what is your goal as an activist, when you make a movie, I mean, like, a movie in the context of LGBT is quite different than any movie. So what's your goal and what's your tools?
I guess my goal when I create films is I want people to think about things differently, and I want people to think about it from an angle that they necessarily haven't before. We recently did a fictional film, which is, we've mainly made documentaries, so mainly we like to present trans people in a slightly different way than the mainstream media does. So the mainstream media always likes to focus on surgery and name changes and family and all these sort of things, but we try to steer away from these sort of focus, and we like to focus on what trans people are doing and who they are and what they like to achieve and what they like doing in their careers, and just to show them as people, because I think that's what people are lacking. People don't see trans people as people in your own community. They see them as sort of isolated people who don't participate, but they don't realize that trans people are around them every single day, and they could be in their family, and they could be their colleagues, or could be someone who, is at the store, or anyone who you run into, and you wouldn't necessarily know that anyone's trans, and you might know that someone's trans, but it's also about people realizing that we're just a part of society, and we do all sorts of things as well. And yeah, I guess with documentaries, there's only so far you can take it, but when you create fiction, you have a chance to shape a narrative, and you can really change hearts and minds through a very powerful narrative, like this film does. But we created a film recently, which was a trans woman who has a neighbor who turns out to be quite transphobic, but they become friends before she knows that she's trans. So you can see an element of friendship, and they become friends, and then she finds out that she's trans, and they have this big argument, but then the trans woman has an abusive partner, and this transphobic woman comes to her rescue at one point when she overhears them screaming and shouting and then throwing things, and you can just see the sense of solidarity between two women in the film, and that sort of also changed the mind of the transphobic woman, because she saw that, obviously we have a lot more in common. Just because we're different doesn't mean that makes you any less of a woman. So that was kind of the end of the movie, which we thought was a nice way to sort of show these commonalities, which is always what I try to do. I try to show people what they have in common, because I think people often don't realize that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And there's a lot of things we can agree on and all relate to, and that's sort of what I try to do.
Even on the even on Fox News?
Well, even on Fox News.
This is a joke because Uglo was speaking in San Francisco on Fox News not long ago. They've been invited, so yeah.
Yeah, I was invited to speak about gender reveal parties, which was an interesting, for anyone who doesn't know, Fox News is like the most intense, conservative, crazy TV channel in the US that you could possibly find. It's Trump's favorite TV channel, and I hope he was watching. But then, and they kind of wanted to make me like this angry person, but it just didn't quite go as they wanted. So it was interesting. But yeah.
You're professional. You don't buy this.
It was just a bit silly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we'll go now. So thank you for staying here. If you want to continue to talk with Uglo, I think.
Yeah. I'll stay around for a while. So
you'll be around. So
yeah. Okay.
And enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you.